Thank you very much, Achilles. I'm very glad to be here. I'm going to speak from here. I haven't prepared any slides, and let me say that I do obviously share the view that was put forward that ERA is important. What I want to emphasize is that it's not only important, it's urgent. Now, Europe has the bad habit of setting for itself targets 2010, 2020 that it doesn't deliver. And what we should remember, even though we are sitting in Brussels, in the capital of Europe, and we have been engulfed recently in many issues, many problems within Europe, we have to remember that the world outside of Brussels and outside of Europe is changing at an incredibly rapid scale. And that's why I want to emphasize the urgency of this agenda. Now, before the crisis, before the financial crisis, before the debt crisis, the sovereign debt crisis, we were already facing very, very difficult challenges. Not of the nature of a crisis in itself, because indeed we were always putting ourselves those deadlines that were far away, the 2020, the 2010, the 2020, but the world had been changing before the crisis at an incredibly rapid scale already. Globalization is a reality. Demographic changes are a reality. Both the aging of population in Europe and the changes in the emerging countries. Now, what we have seen is that the crisis, although we have not been talking much, and our politicians, unfortunately, have been engulfed entirely in day-to-day affairs, those challenges, they have not gone away. And I would say quite the contrary. As we take a little bit of time and try to reflect away from the daily contingencies, what we are seeing is that all of those major challenges that we call globalization for short, those challenges, they've only become more intense, and in a sense, our capacity to solve them is diminished. And when I look at our political leaders who are going to meet this evening and who are going to address finally issues related to growth, in a sense, I don't envy them at all. I don't envy them at all because I think they do realize that beyond the short term, there are those major challenges. There are those major challenges, and yet our capacity to deal with them seems to be greatly diminished. When you look at the emerging countries that were emerging before the crisis, and it's not the crisis that suddenly has made them emerge, but what the crisis has shown for those who had not seen it before is that we are really living through a bifurcation. And that the crisis has accelerated this bifurcation. I invite everybody to look at some of the charts that I didn't bring with me, but that you see very often, looking at the emerging countries and the advanced countries. And what's happening on a number of indicators, and how, again, through the recent events, the catching up. And I think we should all rejoice that emerging countries are catching up, because they are poor economies with lower standard of living. But at the same time, it's clearly questioning our capacity to have strategies that will continue to offer to our citizens an environment that is an environment that will bring indeed what we would like to promising them. Now, I think we need to have indeed a serious discussion about our growth agenda, and not just the growth agenda for the next 6 months, the next 1 year, how we are going to have growth to get out of the crisis. And I think this is an important issue. But again, to go back to the fundamental questions. The fundamental questions that were there before the crisis, that are there through the crisis, and that will be there after the crisis, that is related to globalization, that is related to demographic changes, that is related to climate changes, to all of those tectonic changes that are extremely, extremely important. Now, what can Europe do to help? What can the EU do to help Europe, to help the member states meet those challenges? Now, I think indeed efficiency and equity, as Europe likes to set itself as goals, I think are good goals. Efficiency and equity. And our chair asked, can we reconcile, in the research policy, can we reconcile equity and efficiency? And I think that it's a very important question. And we need to reconcile that, because indeed we are in Europe. And we cannot forget that we are in Europe, and Europe, I think, is indeed a place where we are trying to reconcile the two. We are not always doing a good job. Sometimes we have neither equity nor efficiency. We have to accept that. And sometimes there are trade-offs, and sometimes we can create an environment that can promote both. Now, how do we do that? When I think of Europe and where Europe has levers to do what? Levers to make the full use, the best use of all of our assets. We still have good assets. Although the world is changing, and although others are acquiring assets at a very, very rapid change, indeed R&D is not just anymore in the advanced economies. It's clear. Emerging economies are doing a lot of R&D. They have lots of talents themselves. They have lots of good schools. They're improving their human capital and their environment for R&D and innovation. But I think we still have good assets. Now, how do we make the best use of the assets that we have, and how do we improve those assets? We can't just sort of stay stagnant with the assets that we have. We have indeed, and I fully agree with what the previous speaker said, we need to improve those assets. Now, I think ERA is indeed the way that in the area of innovation, Europe can help. To me, when I think of Europe, the main instrument that always comes to my mind for the promotion of our objectives in Europe from an economic viewpoint, the first instrument that I always think about is the single market. The single market is the basis of the creation of wealth in Europe. And I think in an environment where we have 27 countries, where we have 500 million people, where we have a huge amount of diversity, all of those assets that come from this diversity, from those 500 million people, from the 27 countries, they need to be put to best use, to the best allocation of resources, indeed, through the single market. So to me, when I think of ERA, I think really of two elements. One is a set of rules indeed to promote the best allocation of resources in the area of innovation, and the other one is money. And money is important. But money is not the only element of ERA. Is not the only. The rules are, I think, equally important. So it's money and rules. Now, money needs to be spent well, and money needs to be spent well, especially at a time when money is even more scarce, and public money is even more scarce than it always is. So how do we, with the scarce resources that ERA has, how do we meet, or should we meet, the two goals of efficiency and equity? The two goals of excellence and territorial cohesion that you, Mr. Chairman, raised in your initial in your introduction. Now, I think again, because we are in Europe, we need to meet those two objectives. But as economics teaches us, when we have two objectives, we need two instruments. And there is nothing worse than using one instrument to try to meet the two objectives. Because again, as economics teaches us, you are bound to meet neither one objective nor the other. So if we have two objectives, and I accept the fact that we in Europe have two objectives, we must have an objective of excellence and we must have an objective of cohesion. Now, if I accept those two, then we need two instruments. And again, I think what the previous speaker said is right on the dot. We have structural funds in Europe, and structural funds in Europe is what needs to be used better than what has been done in the past, is what needs to be used in order to meet the objective of cohesion, of territorial cohesion. Money that is allocated for research needs to be allocated according to the objective of the highest quality and excellence. So ERA resources that are limited, to my mind, they need to be allocated purely on the grounds of excellence. But besides that, we need other resources that are meeting the other objective, which is the objective of territorial cohesion. So I think this is the way we need to answer your question. We need the two objectives, but let us not mix the two. Again, I think one of the problems that we have had in the past, sometime with research funding, is that we have mixed the two objectives, and we know what has been the answer. We got neither excellence nor equity. Let me just close with one word, and why I think that ERA is urgent, and it's not just about what I said before about the world changing very, very rapidly, and Europe needing to change itself the way it does business and it does research. It's also about a project for the young generations. There's nothing that worries me more than seeing my students at the university, either in Brussels or elsewhere where I teach, students who do economics, who should be among students rather well equipped to deal with the challenges of the future. And I see them, as you know as well, I see them worried. And I think all of us have this experience to see European youth to be very worried about the future. And to have entered into this state of mind, which I think is a failure on the part of our leaders, the state of mind where their impression, and I hope not reality, is that their condition will be worse than our condition. That the condition of the next generation will be worse than the condition of the previous generation. Now, we were lucky to be exactly in the opposite situation. To be a generation where indeed the conditions that were afforded to us, the means that were given to us, was such that we were able to have a better life and better prospect for life. It's not just that we achieved it, but the prospect as we were finishing school was such that we were confident that we were going to do better in economic terms than our parents, that there were going to be opportunities for our generation. And the current condition in Europe, again, I don't know whether it's correct perception, but that perception is there. And that perception needs to be broken. I think innovation, research in general, is definitely, in my mind, one of the key elements that we put on the table to provide to the young generation a future. Thank you.